everyone. So that was a great introduction. Thank you. So I'm Heather Johnson. I run the Texas Playa Conservation Initiative here in the Panhandle of Texas. This is my contact information. If you need it, you can always find me afterwards, and I've got business cards if you'd like. All right. So what is a playa? I think if you drive around here and after a big rain, you see all these big puddles laying around. Those are playas for the most part. They're clay-lined basins. They're entirely rain-fed systems, so they do not retrieve water from the ground. And then they also are vectors for groundwater recharge, and they exist all over the world. I came from Nebraska. I spent 10 years there. I also worked in the rainwater basin, working with playa lakes there as well. They support many wildlife species, birds, mammals, amphibians. They're also super critical for wintering waterfowl who come from Alaska and northern Canada, in North Dakota, and they winter here. And so those habitats are really important for them to build up food stores to make it back to the breeding grounds so then they can reproduce again. So here's a really nice short video of how playas work. It does a better job than I can. You can find this on Playa Works for Texans website as well as the Playa Lakes Joint Venture website.
Healthy playas are a primary source of groundwater recharge and provide important year-round habitat for birds and other wildlife. Unlike many other wetlands, playas have an irregular wet-dry cycle, which is key to how they function. When dry, the clay soil in the basin contracts and forms large cracks. Tiny seeds and eggs from the last wet period lay dormant in the soil, sometimes for several years, waiting for a heavy rainfall to germinate or hatch. When the rain falls, the first flush of water from surrounding uplands flows toward the playa. As water moves through the grasses surrounding the playa, many sediments that may carry contaminants from farm fields are trapped and stopped from entering the playa. The water continues into the playa basin and into the cracks, beginning its journey to the underlying aquifer. Once the clay soil becomes saturated, the cracks close, allowing the playa to hold water. Wetland plants and invertebrates begin to grow and complete their life cycles. Migrating birds and other prairie wildlife use the playa for much-needed rest stops, water, and food. Water continues to seep into the soil and slowly moves downward along roots and small channels, as well as along the playa's perimeter. Some of the water in the playa is used by plants, but most evaporates and the soil soon dries. Prairie winds scour the playa basin, blowing out some of the sediments that have found their way into the playa. Cracks reappear in the clay soil. The playa awaits the next storm when the cycle will repeat.
So it is really cool to see it, in an animation, but it's even cooler to see it live. So you start out with your big old crack in the clay soil, and then you see the water actually rushing down through those cracks early on in a rainfall. And then it comes to life, and then our plant life. Here's a schematic just in case the video didn't work for you, but you can also get this on our website. So playas are really important for groundwater recharge. So it takes roughly though 10 to 50 years to actually reach the aquifer. Rate of recharge is roughly 100 to, that should be 1,000 times greater in the playa than it is the surrounding landscape. Healthy playas ensure that we put clean water back into our aquifer. And what is a healthy playa? A healthy playa is a basin that is not transformed either through tailwater pits, road water ditches, as well as contains a buffer, grass buffer. So that grass buffer is important for filtration. And then also, in terms of amount of recharge, an average playa gets about 3 inches of average recharge per 4-acre playa. So that's an acre-foot of water per 4-acre playa of recharge annually. So that's enough water. That's enough water to support a family of 4 for 2 years. And that's just a small 4-acre playa. So true to Texan nature, we actually have the most and the largest playas in the Ogallala Aquifer. So of those though, only 4,000 are actually truly functional, 5,000 are at risk, and 13,000 are not functional at all. So different threats to the playas. Talked about those tailwater pits. They were done back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, used for row irrigation primarily. They're also used today for cattle production as cattle ponds, as well as many playas are farmed through. So that causes a threat to the playa because of eventually that playa will sedimentize in and it's no longer functional. Let's see. Apologize, I can't see my slides. So with that, so here's an example of a farm through playa as well as a road going right through the middle of the playa as well. And then in terms of our program, so it is a landowner-friendly program. Let's see where we're at. And it's a partnership that we started with Playa Lakes Joint Venture, started in 2015. With that program, right now we fill in tailwater pits. We pay an incentive payment to the landowner. Right now we're paying $80 an acre for the playa. And then the landowner agrees to a 10-year contract to not alter that playa in the next 10 years. Most of these playas right now are currently in grassland pastures or in CRP. We're starting to move a little bit more into removing playas out of production and then planting grass buffers around those as well. So how I find the landowners, I do a little cyber stalking. So I do a lot of Google Earth searches. I look for playas that would fit well in the program. I'll try to send letters, obviously through programs like this. And actually the majority of our programs recently that we've done have been through word of mouth, neighbors talking to neighbors throughout the area. So once I establish a landowner that's interested, I like to, because you can't always rely on satellite imagery, I like to get my feet on the ground, take a look, make sure the producer understands what the program is, talk about it, make sure the spoil pile is still available, because if we have to bring in dirt, that makes the program a lot more expensive. And then I have a dirt contractor that I work with, and he comes in, he'll fix it. Depending on how big the project, he can have it done in a day or two, up to a couple weeks, just depending on how big the project is. So usually pretty push button easy, and then once that project's done, we send the producers a check. Thank you for letting us restore your playa, and no cost to the landowner at all. So some success. Oh, and then here's an example of a playa that we restored. The bottom one is a playa that we restored a year and a half ago. And then the top playa up here is an unrestored playa. So you can see the difference just in the watershed of how that playa looks from the top one to the bottom one. And that picture was taken last January during antelope surveys. I guess I'm a little ahead of where I thought it was. In terms of the footprint, the right side is project density, so we've done a lot in Swisher County, Jeff Smith County, but throughout the central panhandle area, but there's a lot of room for growth there. We have a lot of partners that we work with. Without those partners, this program would not be possible, and this partner pool is getting larger and larger every day. So, we also do playa field days with Ogallala Commons. They happen almost about every month. We take a little break around Christmas time and sometimes in the middle of summer when it's really hot. So if you're interested in those playa days, also save the date, April 11th and 12th. We are going to do a landowner workshop, and I'll highlight Mr. Burgett here in a second. The other, looking into the future, is also working with our communities, our small communities who are reliant on groundwater to support them. So playas have the ability to support those entirely for their water needs if those playas are functioning, as well as working with producers and reducing irrigation. So here's a really cool website. It's called playaestimators.com. If you want to look and see if you have a playa on your property, see if it's functional. No, it's not 100% because this is done by algorithms and all of that, but it's fairly accurate. So you can pull up your property on playaestimators.com. Hey, look, there's a playa. Uh-oh, this one's not working. This one looks like it may be working right. Let me give Heather a call and see if we can fix that. And then this is just an example of looking at, I think this is Floyd data, seeing how like within this 2-mile radius, these are the playas that can help support your wells and then give them a recharge rate, as well as the city of Olton. And so we worked with Olton a little bit. So the playas that are within the circle is enough groundwater to recharge annually to support about 50% of the population. That means that we need to expand out a little bit more. I'd like to highlight Dr. Chris Burgett. He earned our Lone Star Award last year, and it's for some of his practice and working with playas as well as his farming practices. So I'll let him share his story with you.
There's always a lot of things happening in the veterinary world. This cat today, they want to get it fixed, and that's what we're going to do. Everyone knows, right? My name is Chris Burgett. I am a veterinarian in Hereford, Texas. Feel better though. Yeah, we'll send him home season. That work? We're a small shop, southwest of Amarillo, Texas. We're the self-proclaimed cattle feeding capital of the world. I don't know if that's true or not. We love the wide open spaces. We run a family farm and ranching operation. Tierra de Esperanza means land of hope. Our deal was hope to make a living.
When people think of this area, they think vast expanses of dry land. But the other thing this place is known for are the playa wetlands. Tens of millions of waterfowl and other birds that migrate across the United States are 100% reliant on these playas. They are rain-fed wetlands that supply the majority recharge to the Ogallala Aquifer, which in turn is the majority of our agricultural water.
Across the Great Plains, we're extracting more than we're putting back in.
The majority of wells in the Panhandle are declining. That data is publicly available.
The water level is 113.85 feet.
The general trend in the region is down, 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 down. Without water, you don't have a community, you don't have a civilization. It's that simple. We're probably okay on our protein intake. So we got really interested in playa lakes. We really got interested in grasslands. We look at those. We found out that there's a really good opportunity here to become grass farmers, increase our biological diversity, and still have water available for our family, our livestock, and some of our crops. In 2010, we started on this deal of putting corners of these center pivots that we irrigate with in grass. And we liked it enough, we just kept doing it, removed a lot of our pivots off of our lands. We reduced the amount of acres that we're actually irrigating. We continued to add grass over the years, and at this time we're about 75% in grass, and we try to have cover on all the ground at all times.
Dr. Burgett, he's got a really good system. You can actually produce off the land. It's not about getting rid of agricultural production or leaving or not taking any water at all, but it's about finding that balance. Dr. Burgett's land has really started to respond to the work he's already done.
Windy day here on the plains, isn't it?
It's always a windy day on the plains.
Getting these dry cycles in the Playa Basin coming in. Look at these tracks. Imagine how much water flows through that whenever it starts raining again. If the Playa Lake has gone through a good dry cycle, it improves our chances of catching some recharged water. You can really absorb that water and goes in the cracks. You look at those roots going all the way down. You can take in a lot of water in a very short period of time heading toward the water table. We're basically higher than we were 10 years ago on our Ogallala level, which is a big deal considering the region on average probably declines a foot a year. So it's really about keeping the land home for people.
While he's kind of a lone voice right now, is not the only voice. People want to do what's best for the land and what's best for their families, and so we hope that that momentum continues.
Bye, bye. Whoa. Yeah, you're good. I have two sons. They're 14 years old. Joseph, go now. I know. We need to balance our natural resources so we can be here. The next generation is going to need a drink also. We're very, very lucky to get to be here.
All right, just to reiterate, so we're gonna have a workshop with Mr. Burgett April 11th and 12th. It'll be in Hereford. If you'd like to be on that mailing list, come see me. We're still working on some details and announcements for that. So he'll go more into depth of his journey of how he made that transition. We'll also have some other speakers within RCS and some other speakers to talk about to help producers make that transition. All right, so some take homes. One thing I didn't bring for you, but playas are the main source of groundwater recharge in the Ogallala Aquifer. However, the recharge is not enough to support current irrigation rates. However, it can support our communities, it can support people, it can support rangeland livestock, and then reduce irrigation. So healthy playas improve the water and the water quality on your property. The Ogallala Aquifer in our region is fairly compartmentalized. So it's not like you think of the Ogallala kind of like this big lake underneath, but it's not. It's a bunch of channels basically throughout the region that those playas are feeding into. So it doesn't move horizontally all that much. Most of it stays kind of below where it was recharged. Again, it takes all people in community, it takes producers, it takes our small towns, our cities, it takes everybody to make the system work. And that's it. Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Looking at all the subdivisions going in around Lubbock, how do you expect the builders and the people that are putting them in so that everything's fine?
Yeah, it's something that we are starting to work with the city of Lubbock and some of our other communities on trying to set up those new building communities in a more sustainable way. It just hasn't gotten there yet. We know what our groundwater recharge is, and so it's working with those builders and also trying to work with them to preserve our playas rather than turn them into a giant hole. For one, they're ugly, but two, they're not functioning anymore. So you're losing that recharge. Therefore, that community's losing that recharge. Their ground's gonna go dry. But we also know, okay, we can support this many houses on this much property if we're gonna use groundwater. So we can work with them. It's a matter of, pushing policy, talk to our leaders about making that change. So I know that, I live in Littlefield. There's a community just outside that has water problems because they're on groundwater and, they don't have enough water to support them, so. Yes?
Is there a treatment that can
Again, we're working with the city of Lubbock. That's more of a question for Lubbock, and no, they're not. But once those pits are dug, you kind of lose that recharge. You don't have any plants or vegetation in there for the roots to go down. We're trying to work on a park here actually in Lubbock to restore playa back, and then reusing that water, putting it back up on the upland, let it filter through some buffers, grass buffers that we need. But in terms within the deep city, it's a little harder to do. So, you know, unfortunately, where some of those are, damage is done. So that's more of a conversation with the city of Lubbock, but we are working with them and trying to make that change in the future for future development. Anyone else? No, we don't. That's part of that count that's in that whole lost playas and the, 23,000 playas that are non-functional. That's part of that count. But the bulk of them are still out on our landscapes here. And there's definitely a lot of room. I mean, we've done, which I missed the slide. I'll go back in terms of our restoration itself. So honestly, we obviously haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg, but in our program, we have done, 83 restoration. With those restorations, that's 240 million gallons now restored annually to the aquifer. Yeah, it's small, because if you think about how one pivot, we'll use that easily in a year, right? So, or a couple pivots. But all we can do is we can all do our job and do a little bit at a time. That's where we're going to have the big change. So, any other questions? All right. Well, I'm sitting in the back corner. If you'd like a business card and like me to take a look at your playa, I'd be more than happy to. So. Can't see my flag.
Again, thanks to Heather Johnson for her presentation. Many of us have seen those 2.5 inch rains and how much water is in those playa lakes. So that's something that we often probably need to think about. The long-term motivation of farmers. Can they survive in an uncertain world? That's the title of our next presentation. Kevin Brinkley, originally from Burgett, Texas, graduated from Texas Tech University with a bachelor's and master's degrees from the Department of Agriculture and Applied Economics. Currently, Mr. Brinkley is the president and CEO of Plains Cotton Cooperative Association, which is here in Lubbock. A friend of the cotton industry and agriculture, please join me in welcoming Mr. Kevin Brinkley.
You got it. Darn it, burn it. Well, thank you for having us here today to talk about this. Really, I think there's obviously not a more important topic in terms of agriculture, but in terms of society in general than water. And so we're very, very grateful that the TAWC puts on this program, and hopefully over the years it will continue to grow. So I've got a kind of a lengthy topic here, and it might sound kind of scary on the surface, but we're just going to dig into some things. We're going to fly through some numbers pretty quick, and the only thing I'm not going to talk about directly today is water. I'm going to talk about all the things that are around the edges of that and what it means to agriculture and to our economy. So what I thought we would do is talk about the future in three different windows of time here. Sort of the short term, the next 12 months, then that 3 to 5 year outlook, and then beyond from that. And then we'll talk about some things at the end of the presentation that I think are really important for us to consider around this topic. So let's talk about the next 12 months. I don't think it's a secret to anybody here, especially if you're involved in production agriculture, what has happened to the cost of growing any crop. Doesn't matter what it is. So whether it's cotton or grain sorghum, any of the others that require fertility and any type of boost to get the extra production out, your costs have gone up. So here we're looking at a shot of the cost of nitrogen, and we're certainly looking at bigger numbers there. We could look at the whole fertilizer complex here. All of these have come down some from their worst levels of right after the Russia-Ukraine conflict developed, but they are still, in some cases, 4x what they were in January of 2020. And there's not really much to be done about that. In some cases, some of the ingredients, some of the nutrients are probably more than they were a year ago at this time, depending on what your setup is. So one of the major causes of that, as we know, has been what happened in Ukraine. You can look here and see at the share of nutrients that are either produced there or have their base in one of those two countries, and it is substantial. And this war is an extreme pain for not only the people that are going through it on the ground there, but it is causing ripple effects through the entire ag economy. And really, you have to acknowledge that this is a geopolitical event that is affecting everybody on the planet. So we think this is going to go on for a while. I think, if you follow the news flow on this, certainly it doesn't look like there's any solution to this anytime soon. So this is one that we're probably going to be faced with for 12 months and beyond that, unless something really miraculous happens. So energy prices are tied into fertilizer, as you well know. There's a lot of energy involved in all that, but there's a lot of energy in producing agricultural products. And we have seen, our energy prices relaxed here in the U.S., but they're still high. And so the only thing that you can take as sort of the silver lining is that it could be worse. You could be in Europe. Even though their prices are down substantially from where they were when the war broke out, and the aftermath of all that, you're still looking at, again, energy prices that are well above where they were in early 2020. And the reason I use that as a benchmark is because that is right before the pandemic hit and sort of turned all of our worlds upside down. So these, again, are really important numbers as we think about the cost of production and how that follows through to what we're seeing in the entire economy. One of the good news stories in terms of pricing that has come down is what it costs to ship our agricultural exports around the world. So this is the Baltic Dry Index. You can see here that it spiked up dramatically when the pandemic hit, just like everything else. And it has moderated down to the point where it is about on par with where it was before the pandemic hit. So when you think of bulk freight that goes in a vessel, this is some good news that we can see for the near term. Containers, I will put this on the screen because this is what we ship cotton in. So each container holds about 88 bales, and we ship that to our global customers around the world. And this one really, the spread here that we saw that developed when all of the logistics logjam occurred is amazing. And you're down to a point now where container rates are about equal going east and west. I will say there's probably an unusual element about this slide that I don't like. I do like the fact that it doesn't cost us as much to ship cotton to a Southeast Asia customer as it did during the height of the pandemic. But I also think this is a telling story about the economy in general, is that when you see rates equalize like this, that tells you that there's not a lot of commerce flowing between these two destinations. And this chart simply measures, the orange line is what it takes to get a container from Southeast Asia, Vietnam, China, one of those origins to the U.S. And then that blue line on the bottom is what it costs for us to send a container out of L.A. Long Beach back over there. So again, this is probably largely driven by what is either a recession or close to a recession in the global economy. So probably the last thing that you decided that you would talk about or hear about at the Water College would be the Federal Reserve, but we're going to talk about it a little bit because it does have such an impact on what we're experiencing right now. And this is a quote from Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, and we understand better how little we understand about inflation. I don't think I could agree with him any more than that. You know, I was telling a group last week that, you know, when the Federal Reserve was lowering interest rates and they were buying up fixed income assets in the treasury markets and other things like that, I thought, yeah, they must have access to some data that we don't have. And my training is in economics, and you know, I thought they just got to have access to something extraordinary, because this just doesn't make sense. The federal government has pumped $5.5 trillion worth of stimulus into the economy. There's no reason for this. Well, I should have trusted my own instinct, because it just doesn't make any sense. And so now they are dramatically trying to correct what they have done, and you are seeing the fruits of this in your everyday life out there. So this is a chart with inflation and what the Fed has done with interest rates. And so you can see here as interest rates have climbed here on the very right side of the chart, they have in fact started to tame inflation a little bit, but it is going to be very painful as we go through this process of having these rates hiked up. Now, there's a mixture of ages in this room, and I can tell that some of you are probably in the same age bracket as I am. I can remember having a double-digit mortgage, but we have a lot of people in here that are young enough that that is just outrageous. So we're going to have a period of adjustment in terms of what our expectations are for the cost of money, and I think this is going to hang around for a while, and it's going to have an impact on what we do in agriculture. Consumers have been hit pretty hard by prices. You can see here again, inflation has started to moderate a little bit because of these actions by the Fed, but we have certainly seen an inflation regime like we have not seen in several decades, and a lot of that is driven by some of the energy and some of the other complexes that we saw in the earlier slides. So, go ahead and build through that to save some time. What's happening with consumers? Can they hang with it? So ours is largely a consumer-driven economy here in the U.S., and that is what drives most of our industry here. And so can our consumers hang with it? As you know, they received a lot of stimulus money during the pandemic. They spent a lot. You know that because you weren't able to get the things that you normally get at the shelf as easily as you would expect. And so they spent dramatically on all kinds of durable goods, home textiles. The only thing they didn't really spend it on were services, and now those are available. So are they running out of dry powder? We think that they are. You will see consumer balance sheets. In other words, how much money do they have in their savings account is starting to get depleted, and you can get an indicator of that by the fact they're using their credit cards more, and that is what we're seeing in the right side of this chart is an increase in the use of consumer credit, and so that is causing them to probably make some choices when it comes to whether they buy food or fuel or shelter versus when they buy textiles and apparel that our cotton supplies here in Texas. So let's shift over to the intermediate outlook 3 years from now. There are some things here that we have to acknowledge that are going to continue to play a role in our economy. China is still just a huge player in every aspect of agriculture. So, you know, you've got 1.5 billion people there, and you've also got some pretty high aspirations from the Chinese government to become a real economic superpower, and so they are flexing that muscle in pretty much every category. And so there's a lot of concentration risk when it comes to how important China is as a trading partner. If you can imagine that you're running a business and your biggest partner is also your biggest competitor, that's what China is. And so it is a real tightrope for us to walk politically, economically, in the competitive landscape, and you're going to see more and more about this as we move into the future. These are our exports to China in those left two bars for the last couple of years in terms of grain and cotton. The two bars on the right are what we export to the world. So you can see here that China is the lion's share of what we export to the global market. In terms of cotton, for example, China uses 1 out of every 3 bales grown on the planet. That is a lot of concentration risk with one trading partner. And so we, again, from a political standpoint, our leaders are going to have to figure out how they can coexist economically with China without giving up too much power to them. And I don't know if you saw the news on this last week, but China it really has had a couple of very strange moments in my mind about how they talk about information about what's going on there. One is that that they totally reversed their COVID stance, and they've started to actually release more data about the number of people that are sick and that have died because of COVID. That's an unusual development in my mind for them to talk about that. So just as a way of context, in early December, they reported that 37 people died of COVID after they reversed their zero COVID policy. And then here this week they talk about 60,000 people, and that is a dramatic change for them. The other thing that I found quite surprising this week is that China actually acknowledged that their population is starting to decline. And this was probably not supposed to happen until around 2030, according to demographers around the world. But China has got an aging population like most of the developed world does. And this is going to be a real issue for them. Think about this. They instituted the one-child policy in 1980. They've got at least 3 generations of a lot of population missing because of that policy. And they do not have these institutional support systems for their seniors like we do with the Social Security system for all of its ups and downs. You have actually the current generation is working to support those who are retired. So you have 1 grandchild supporting 4 parents and potentially more grandparents than that, depending on how many of those are living. So that is a lot of pressure on the current workforce in China. Food security in the hands of just a few people out there. And I'll look here and remind myself what's on the screen. This is wheat. You can see that we've got a lot of concentration here in terms of how many countries actually influence the world wheat picture. The top 7 are 81% of the exports here. So wheat is in the hands of a few. And you can see by some of the names up here on the left, you've got Russia, Canada, you've got Ukraine over there. And of course, 2 of those countries are embroiled in a war at the moment. One of the things that I think that we don't think too much about here in Texas, especially out here in West Texas, is the impact of soybean on our agricultural markets. Soybeans are huge, and the reason is because, as you know, biofuels are going to continue to be a factor for the allotment of acreage. Even if they are not grown here in the West Texas area, they are going to be a factor in terms of how many, what our acres are worth here. So if you have acres that switch from cotton to soybeans, as they probably will in this coming spring in the Mississippi Delta or the Southeast United States, that is going to probably create opportunities here for a Texas cotton farmer because the market will have to buy those acres at some point to keep cotton production up going here. But the big issue here is that about 45% of the soybean crop will go into biofuels, whether it's into diesel or aviation fuel. When it comes to cotton, there are 3 countries that basically supply, in terms of the export market, most of the supply for textile mills around the world. We're one of those. Almost every bale that is grown here in Texas, Oklahoma, or Kansas makes its way into an export market. And the others out there are Brazil and Australia. The 3 of these countries are the predominant exporters for the world. So again, there's a lot of concentration risk here for places that have big textile industries, but don't produce much cotton. And you can think about any of these countries in sort of the Indian subcontinent or Southeast Asia where they need more cotton than they can grow. Our stocks in cotton have relaxed a little bit. This is something that has been a little bit surprising, but I think it would be largely attributed to the recession fears that are out there. It's again has suppressed the demand for cotton, but this was a very tight picture even as little as 3 months ago, and now it's started to relax a little bit, and I think that's part of what you're seeing in terms of cotton prices and why they have sort of traded in the 80s here for the last several weeks, and probably will continue to do that until we get some kind of a bullish narrative, such as stronger export sales or some other indicator of heavier consumption of cotton. Grain inventories are also down. This is, you can tell by the trend at the end of this chart out here that this is pretty much all the major grains and what we're seeing in terms of stocks. You've got drought in Latin America that is kind of adding fuel to the fire here. So again, when you think about what is competing for the acre, you've got a lot of incentive for farmers that can grow competing crops competitively in the southern United States to look at those, and that again may provide an opportunity for better pricing for a cotton farmer here in Texas. I won't spend a lot of time on this chart other than to say that right now, again, because of the recession, we've got probably more cotton here to export than the world actually needs, and so that's going to be a little bit of a weight on prices. One of the things, again, going back to China for just a second, is the fact that the amount of cotton that they need and the amount that the world is able to supply are basically in balance at the moment. And this is one of the things where we need the Chinese economy to reopen. We need them to not only consume more cotton, but we need them to produce more textiles and apparel so that it will take up some of this cotton that's sitting on the world market at the moment. One of the things that we've been fighting in terms of all agricultural prices has been our competitiveness. And so when you think about the fact that you've got low stocks of grains and other things, people might have to pay up for whatever it is, especially when you have on a food crisis brought on by a war in Ukraine. But when you think about our competitiveness, you have to think about currency. And so the dollar's been extremely strong over the past year because we have been the best house in a bad neighborhood when it comes to investment quality. So people that want to buy U.S. Treasuries or invest in the U.S. stock market have had to have dollars to do that. So they have bid the price of that up no matter where they're at. But the real story here is if you look at the markets where we sell cotton, for example, the picture is much worse than this. And so just this past week, for example, Pakistan has started to curtail the imports of U.S. cotton because they have to pay for it in dollars and they are running in short supply. And of course, Pakistan is an 8 million bale market for world cotton, and that is not an encouraging sign for us if they can't get enough dollars to pay for what they've ordered. So this again, as other central banks in the world begin to raise their interest rates, this will help. I think that's part of what you're seeing in this downward trend out toward the most recent part of this chart. But we have to be able to say that we're kind of in sync with the rest of the world so that there's just not this full-on press for dollars that make our goods more expensive compared to our competitors like Brazil, for example. All right, let's talk about where we really want to talk about what's out in the future. And I feel the most comfortable about this one because it's the furthest away. And I've got the most room to guess about things. So let's talk about 5 years and beyond. You can't look at what's going to happen to us in agriculture and geopolitically without thinking about population. And population is going to be a huge driver about what happens with water. So these are just kind of some relative sizes of the number of people that live in these different continents. You can see that this chart is dominated by China and India, but the one that will really grab your attention is that the continent that will experience the highest level of growth over the next 30 years will be Africa. They do not have some of the constraints on reproduction in those continents, in that continent, and they will experience great growth over that time. And so, of course, some of that will be dictated by the amount of water that they have available. And so if you look at what happens to our water, do we sell water to Africa? No, we don't. Well, actually, we do. We export food there. The quickest way to export water is to export food or fiber or anything like that. So this is going to play a huge role in what we're going to see on production of agricultural goods. So this is what population has done and just the amount of history that we know about. And you can see here just in the past 2 millennia here, tremendous growth in population. And this is going to continue to be an issue for us because of what we're just talking about with Africa. But you can see we're almost at 8 billion people on the planet right now, and that is going to be a tremendous challenge for we that are involved in the agricultural industry to be able to make sure that we can feed and clothe that level of population. I can tell you this is having an impact on us right now because it's again affecting who controls the acre. And so you can see here, this is just a brief history of competing crop prices out here. And right now, food is winning out. The ones with the best performance of late are grains. And so people are saying we need food, not fiber at the moment. This has got to change for the cotton market to improve. Soybeans, again, because of that heavy use of biofuels, is going to pretty much control the picture here. And so the number of acres in the U.S. that are devoted to soybeans is so great that will have an impact on everything else that is grown, including wheat, corn, grain, sorghum, and cotton. Cotton's going to lose some ground in 2023, again, because of those ratios of competing crop prices. Right now, if you were to ask most of the analysts that are looking at this in the U.S., we normally plant about 12 to 13 million acres of cotton here. We're probably looking at somewhere between 9.5 million acres at current prices. And again, that will impact what happens here in Texas because we are more dedicated to cotton than most other areas of the U.S. belt. These ratios you can see here, soybeans, again, a tremendous advantage over cotton. And this is just simply dividing the soybean price at harvest by the harvest price for cotton. You've got over 17-to-1 for soybeans, really strong year-over-year increase from where we were last season getting ready to plant. So what I want to get you to think about in conclusion here is just think about the role of risk. And when we talk about water and all the things that we have to do to feed and clothe this planet, risk are some of the biggest things that we have to worry about. And this is just a chart. You don't need to worry about breaking down the causes of risk too much. I think the direction and magnitude is what we're looking at here. And these are natural disasters of all sorts here that we have to account for. And so whether it's drought or severe weather, hurricanes, you name it, we are seeing an increased environment of risky events for the globe to absorb. And so this is going to be a real problem for public policy makers, insurance companies, those that trade in financial markets, anybody that is willing to absorb risk is going to be looking at what is the track record. It's what your insurance company does now. What is the law? What are the history of the loss ratios, and what am I willing to cover those losses for in terms of insuring that? This is a trend that is not our friend. Again, looking at just multi-billion-dollar losses and weather losses of all kinds. The actual numbers here are not as important as the direction of what we're looking at. This is a tremendous level of new risk introduced every year. And you think about what we're looking at for not only agricultural products, you look at crop insurance, what it takes to insure your farm, your buildings, your property, whatever it is. You're seeing a higher value of that and more concentration, so it's going to take more insurance to cover all of that. So I've got three things that I want to leave you with here at the end of this, and that is that we've got, in the near term, the next 12 months, we've got some real pain in front of us because of what the Fed and others are having to do to tackle the inflation story out there. It's real. And so it's going to hurt for a little while, and I think most of us probably come to grips with that. But hopefully, those that are making these decisions will be able to guide us into, the least painful situation possible. But I think, the story of the consumer is probably going to rule the day here. Can the consumer withstand what the Fed is doing to tame inflation? Secondly, I think if you look at the area, not only for the next 12 months, but that intermediate term, there are going to be windows of opportunity for us to make some good decisions about what to grow and how to sell it. I think those windows will open briefly, and then you'll have more problems that will take away the opportunity, and we'll have to kind of ride it out. That's just going to kind of be the bumpy nature of what we see over the next 3 to 5 years and possibly beyond. But I think, again, when you look at the longer term picture, if you think about every area of your life that is risky, it is going to cost either more for you to get somebody to take that risk. So think about the insurance products that you buy, or the financial instruments that you use to manage risk on your farm, or in marketing, or whatever it is, whether you pay someone to take that risk or you decide to wear it yourself. So you may decide at some point there's some area of your business that you need to absorb that yourself. It's going to become more costly. So we've got to work together in forums like this one, in organizations like this one, and other organizations that you're a member of, to be able to make sure that we're talking about all of these factors, that we can position ourselves well for the future. Because that's the only way that we're going to be able to withstand some of these things that are headed our way. It's not meant to be any kind of a scary topic or anything like that. We just have to acknowledge it and deal with it. So I will stop at this point and ask if you have any questions, arguments. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Population curve.
Yes.
One of the things that made China attractive 20 or 30 years ago was the cost of production and the cost of labor. As you begin to have more older workers or workers out of the workforce compared to new workers entering into the workforce, their labor costs have increased exponentially to the point where now Mexico
Yes.
is a lower cost labor production environment than China.
Yes.
Looking at that long-term demographics, looking at concentration risk, looking at cost and labor costs specifically, understanding that with COVID, a new buzzword is reshoring, reshoring industry, and bringing potentially the textile industry back into North America. Again, looking at Mexico, which is our largest single trading partner on a global basis across all commodities and all products. And understand that they are now the low-cost producer. You see going down the road in the next 3 to 5 years, the ability for us taking textile manufacturing, a piece or a portion or a component, and either reshoring that or at least moving back into the Western Hemisphere.
Slowly is the answer. So the question, if you didn't hear it, is, is there a scenario where we start to see some reshoring of the textile complex that we had here years ago? And I think the answer is it's going to take some time to do that. And there are some factors at play. So if you back up to the year 2000 and before that, In terms of the U.S., we used about 80% of the cotton that we produced here in America we used domestically. So we had enough textile capacity to do that. The U.S. made some trade policy decisions around, if you remember the word GATT, G-A-T-T, and the multi-fiber arrangement kind of did away with almost all of our textile industry here. And it moved into low-cost production areas in Southeast Asia. China was one of those. So that is going to be hard to overcome. So there's the area of competency. So you have manufacturing competency. Good, bad, or indifferent, the Chinese have gotten really, really good at manufacturing of all kinds, and textiles and apparel are one of those. Now, their increased cost, as you observed, has predominantly pushed a lot of the new growth in textile manufacturing into the areas that are on their perimeter. So think about Vietnam, which has grown 4x in the last 10 years in terms of what they can produce. That's where the new investment is going. You are starting to see some new investment in this hemisphere for textile manufacturing, some of it from U.S. companies, ironically, but you're starting to see, because of some of the geopolitical issues, the opportunity here. And so I think new investment will look at this hemisphere, but it's going to take a long time to actually draw down what is already in place in mainland China at the moment. So there's some opportunity there, and I think certainly, you know, that's a way to de-risk yourself, is to, if you want to serve the largest consumer market in the world, which is the U.S., park that stuff close by and have it here. So that's what I'm hoping for. Good question. Yes, sir.
From the basic economic theory of revision to the mean, the market finding the mean, obviously I don't think we're going to see that in the 12-month period. Do you expect it in the midterm or in the 5+ year in the market to kind of level out its moving?
I think it almost has to be in the intermediate term, because we'll go through these cycles again and again. You know, there's capital deployed for all of these. You know, I know cotton is sort of my wheelhouse, so I'm going to talk about that. But I think this will hold true for other industries as well. But there's capital deployed to you know, stand up a textile mill or an apparel manufacturing facility or whatever it is, and so they will find ways, I believe, to make sure that that is at its highest and best use as soon as possible. You know, if they have to adjust, you know, their capacity utilization to run the plant slower, faster, whatever it takes, I think they'll find a way to do that. But, you know, again, at the end of the day, if we can find a way to keep the consumer strong, we know they'll turn on a dime. At least in the developed world, the consumer will turn on a dime you know, to buy stuff. And so that's just kind of the way we're at. So I think it almost has to correct. If it doesn't, I don't know what the consequences of that are, because that sort of sounds like a global, you know, a long-term global recession if we're in that point. So, yes, sir. Good question. Others? Well, I thank you for having me to present here today. I'll be around for a little bit if you think of another question, but I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentation today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Brinkley. We're pleased to have you here today with us. Our next presentation, Wesley Burgett received a bachelor's degree as well as a master's degree in the BS being Millersville University in Pennsylvania, as well as a Master of Science in Atmospheric Science from Texas Tech University. Since 1999, Mr. Burgett has been the Research Associate and Operations Manager of the West Texas Mesonet here in Lubbock. Mr. Burgett will be here to talk to us about producer advantages of the West Texas Weather Mesonet. Thank you for being here with us today, sir. Did I pronounce your name properly?
Thanks to TAWC for allowing me to come and talk to you folks. we went through a lot of changes in the last year, and I want to see if I can help your producers where to find the data on our web pages and apps and other issues. So I appreciate the opportunity. So this is our current map of where we have stations. It shows 148. We actually just finished one yesterday in Wichita Falls, and we just started releasing data. So now there's 149 of these stations, actually now in 3 states, where we're releasing weather data, ag data for the public to use. This is what they look like. As you can probably tell, we don't like a lot of trees in the right part of the country for that. This was in the Rolling Plains. This is at Kroll over in Ford County. This is a 33-foot tall tower. It has a fenced-in area. Everything fits inside the fence. It's solar powered, and we use a cell modem for communications. So, this one is in eastern New Mexico, up in Andy. If you've never been to Andy, don't worry about it. The population is pretty much negative. There's no people there, but it's a really nice part of the world to visit. But again, there's no trees, which makes me happy for getting really good wind data. But this particular station is down in Big Bend, and there's not a lot that grows down there, but we did this for the National Park Service. So when they closed Reese, for those of you in Lubbock, in the mid-90s, they closed Reese Air Force Base, and Texas Tech was able to get some funding from the state for economic development, and from that funding, we were able to start what's called the West Texas Mesonet. Mesonet is pretty much just a fancy word for a bunch of weather stations that are fairly close together. So from that initial funding, we got 25 stations. And over the years, as we meet more and more people, people ask for more and more stations, and if they can talk me into it, we'll go ahead and add them. If it's a pretty location, there's a good bet, I'll figure out how to make it work to get the station built. So from that initial funding from the state, we built our first station in 2000 at Reese Center, which, for those of you not in Lubbock, is just west of Lubbock. So from that point, we've slowly added. We try to do about 8 to 9 new stations a year. The current funding is mostly from what's called the National Mesonet Program. It's a federally funded agency. We get funding from Wind Energy, the National Wind Institute, and we sell some of the high-end wind data to private entities and other groups. So what do we sample? Every station is the same. We sample what 33-foot wind, 9-meter temperature. Within the last 10 years, we've added a 20-foot wind to help out ag interests with crop dusting and other stuff, but we also do stuff with the Texas Forest Service. It's pretty much a fire weather sensor. We also do 2-meter wind, which is pretty much strictly for the ag, spraying and other interests for that. It can be used from other stuff to get different wind levels on the tower for other things. So for the temperatures, we do a 9 and a 2-meter temperature, and this is important for you producers. This is what's called the temperature inversion data, and a lot of people already use this to satisfy the state requirements for spraying. So if you're doing crop dusting, you have to give it a temperature inversion level. So when we introduce the 9, 2, and 1.5 meter temperatures, that's one way that may help you, especially with spraying interest. We also do barometric pressure. It probably won't help you much. It's mostly for aviation. Rainfall, it never rains anymore pretty much, but we still have rain gauges everywhere. And we also do a 2-meter solar radiation data for that. For soil data, originally we were going to do 4 levels. We've added some additional levels about 15 years ago. So we measure soil temperatures at 2, 4, and 8 inches in natural soil. Natural soil depends where you are. If it's in Yoakum County, there's not much natural soil. It's just blow sand pretty much. But if you're in the Rolling Plains, it's usually sod and other grasses like that. Bare soil, 2 and 8 inches will give you soil temperature for that. Soil moisture, we measure moisture levels at 2, 8, 24, and 30 inches. Those initial levels were set to meet some requirements for the government, for the Weather Service. In reality, when you're dealing with 30 inches on that caprock, you're below the caliche level, and it's probably not going to help you much. So the 2 and 8 inches will probably be the most useful on that caprock. This is the station at Borden County at Fluvanna. This is what the stations look like. There's 29 different parameters we measure. Each station is a little different. We try and keep a little bit of grass around everything. It's tough in drought years. The location for this one is changed. The ground cover has changed over the years, but in reality, from my perspective, a CRP is the best for a new station. If we can find an area that's going into CRP, I know the land will be similar ground cover for 10 years, and I try and look for that. It doesn't always work if a particular client wants a specific location at the end of a pivot near a turn row or something like that. We'll try and make it work. We have certain criteria we have to meet for what's called the National Mesonet Program, but I will try and work with the landowner to make it work to get the data back. So who uses the data? It has varied significantly over the years. Originally, it was pretty much strictly ag. When we only had 30 stations, we were centered around Lubbock. It was pretty much just for cotton. But as you guys know, things have changed with cotton. There's more and more different things, from sorghum to the corn to everything else. So we try and cater to meet certain things and still be able to meet the National Measurement Program standards. It's not easy. We've upset some people over the years, and we can't just specifically focus on ag. We have to satisfy other requirements, specifically the National Weather Service. We release the data to the media, but you get what you get with the media. I try and avoid all that other stuff with that, but so we do release it to the public. Some TV stations use it. A lot of the radio stations, you'll see it. If it's a weather station, they're probably using our data, but they're not mentioning it's a Mesonet station. So we release the data on our website, mesonet.tcu.edu, and through an iOS app and a new Android app will be coming soon later this year. We've changed significantly how we present that data last year. We were having issues with private companies and other consultants that were taking the data and selling it, changing the data, and it got to be a serious concern. So I will be showing you the new web pages and where you may be able to see the data that you saw before. For detailed, we sample at 5 times a second for the data. That's not much use to you guys, but it's very valuable to engineers and other consultants like that, so we'll sell that data to those folks. For maintenance, it's a few of us that go out and mow, remove tumbleweeds, and this year has been absolutely terrible for tumbleweeds. That little bit of rain in late summer and fall got a record group of tumbleweeds. It reminds me of the 2011 drought, 2012 for tumbleweeds in this part of the world. So for new stations, I get asked all the time for new stations. We try and make it work. We have a limited budget. Each one of these stations is about $25,000, so it's a significant investment from us, the landowner, whoever may fund that project. So I'm willing to put a station pretty much anywhere in West Texas if I can work with a specific producer if you want something. If we can justify certain requirements, we may be able to do a station for you. So this is the new web page. A lot of the things, this is all a map-based thing. So these 3 icons here will have all the data that it displays in a map-based format. A lot of the farmers sometimes are upset with this change starting, and when we started introducing it in the spring. We were doing the same thing for 15 years, and it reached a point of where we couldn't maintain the databases into this, so we switched to a new way of presenting it. The speed is much faster with the new web page. The data that you saw is still there, it's just in a different format. It's more of a map-based thing. Some of the other things that you'll see on here, now this is pretty much just for spraying, but we do some wind data aloft for ag interest if you're crop dusting or you know somebody that's crop dusting for that. We have 2 different things. I'll show you a little bit more later. But we're also releasing National Weather Service forecast. I am not responsible when their forecast stinks. Sometimes they're wrong, but we do release that data for that. And we also were doing some additional data plots. In the past, we would only release 24 hours of data plots. We're now doing 7 days of data where you can get data plots for a particular station. And this is similar for some of the long-time Mesonet users. We used to have something called a clickable map. It was extremely popular, so we sort of changed it into a more easier display. You can see all the data, and this will update every 5 minutes on the web page for that. So for users, the most popular page we had in the old days was called the Plain Language Observations page. Many hits, on the order of 50,000 hits per day when it was a high-end weather event. So we've streamlined it with the new database and new web page to show it in this format. So from a producer aspect, so this is updating every 5 minutes. So every station will show up when it's working correctly every 5 minutes. Temperature dew point, and the actual temperature inversion data that you'll need on the ag spraying forms is this one here, the 1.5 M, the 9 meter delta T. That is the temperature difference between 1.5 meter height and 9 meter height. The state has required with the new legislation of the last few years, significant, when you're spraying, you have to know what the temperature inversion is. So this may be your most important value here, especially for some of the producers in spraying. So we do wind and other levels every 5 minutes, and then the precip is here, the solar radiation value is here, and the RFTI is pretty much for fire weather users. So this has just recently been released in the last 2 months. This is a different type of daily summary page than you were used to. It loads much quicker and it has all that stuff. You can go back, you can go back in time with this calendar here. You can go back and get the high, low, and other information. The peak wind for the day, the max wind gust, the precip, and some solar radiation data for every station we have. The other thing, the two main things that we do that are most important is wind and rain. So within the last 3 months, we decided to completely redo how we're presenting the rain data. It's been a struggle. We are very small. There's only a few of us that do all this stuff, and I was doing all of this stuff manually over the years. And I'm getting too old for that now, so we've automated a lot of this stuff. So now for rainfall, you can get our entire histories of rainfall on this particular page here. We have each month, each year, and then an average going up. The one qualifier for this, a lot of our stations are fairly new. They may only have a few years worth of data. And some of that was during the good years in 2015 and 2018 when it rained. And you can also see the dry years in 2011 when it didn't rain at all. But we've had a lot of positive feedback for this particular plot, and people using this type of format. So hopefully this will help you guys in producing area. So this is the soil data. So soil data is released every 15 minutes. We sample, we do average, we do peaks, and then we release this particular one. So this is average 15-minute soil temperature data. Not all stations have soil. They'll have an NA on it. I've tried to go back and retrofit. With the changes in ground cover, changes in land use, a lot of this stuff, especially in Amarillo, was land. This actually went back to even CRP, so I went ahead and went back and reinstalled soil temp, soil moisture data for that. As land use changes with each one of these stations, we have to reevaluate how we do stuff. As the urban sprawl of Lubbock keeps getting bigger and bigger, it's harder and harder to keep some of that changes. But so I'm hoping to keep the soil data added more and more as we add more and more stations. So for this particular one, probably the 8-inch sod temperature is the most important, especially for the cotton folks for that. The water content data, trying to explain volumetric water content data to a farmer is not easy when I don't even understand it half the time. So what we do is we just release a value. For this particular one, 0.5 is saturated, 0.1 is dry. In most cases, it's 0.1 is dry in this part of the world for that. This is a summary for the soil data. You can go back in time and get average. The one particular thing that we've changed and added, a lot of people do to request, is the 7-day average temperature right here. We'll be adding some more products to some of these pages, but this is an important request, especially from the cotton folks who are adding all that for that. This is one of these 7-day plots, so each station you can get this. I was trying to think what might help you the most. The wind data fascinates me the most. Seeing the wind data changes over a 7-day period it's kind of neat to see all that. But this particular trend in aged soil temperature is really neat. When we had the really cold air outbreak and before Christmas, the changes in the soil temperature when everything was so dry was pretty substantial for that. So this is more for the ag interest. This is a National Weather Service product we do for aviation, but I was thinking about it. It may actually help a lot of the ag crop dusting folks that may want to use it. So this particular thing is called a LiDAR. We have one of these because they cost a lot of money. It's actually at Reese Center here in Lubbock. So you can get high resolution plots. So this is plotting about every 10 feet above the ground, going up to roughly 2,000 feet. You'll be able to see the wind data aloft. So this particular, you're at the ground, the wind is light. If you go up at roughly 200 feet, the wind is blowing 60 miles an hour. This is important for spray drift and other stuff for crop dusting. It's really important if you're flying southwest of Dallas and it gets really bumpy as you're leaving Lubbock. But I was thinking this may help some of especially the ag producers that use the spraying. This particular unit over here is called a SODAR. It beeps and carries on, makes a lot of noise, so they're generally, these are out in the middle of nowhere. We have 3 of these, Midland, Hobbs, and San Angelo, and you can also get wind data as you're going up aloft, wind speed and wind direction. In the roughly 2014, we started our first venture into apps, and it's been an interesting ride. Being as small as we are, we develop our own apps. So the iOS app we've had a lot more stability with. So this particular one, if you have an iOS platform, Apple, we have version 2.0 available for you. A lot of the stuff I showed you on the web is also available in the app. With the addition, there's actually heat units for cotton on the iOS app. Right now we're at 2.0 for this particular version. We're getting ready to do 3.0. We're hoping to release at the same time we release a new Android app. The timetable on that has changed. A lot of stuff has changed with the Android OS that's impacted how we do stuff. So if you have an Android, please be patient with us. We're figuring out how to do the code and make the changes, but we hope to release that later this year. But the iOS app is actually more users on this than there is on the web page because the iOS app is very useful, especially if you're in a tractor out in the field trying to get all the data. So the original Android app we have, it was our first venture in, and there was a lot of issues with it. So last year when the Android OS changed the last time, we eventually just had to pull it. So there is no Android app available right now for our products. The Mesonet web page is phone friendly. So if you get a Mesonet TTO on your Android app, it's not as nice as a regular app. You can still get all that data on your Android platform. This is if you like this, you can live in West Texas. This is beautiful to me. This is text line, Northwest Panhandle, Dallam County. So every new station we do is a partnership. When we started this project, the goal was to do 30 stations, and we're at 149. So we've struggled over the years. Some years we didn't have money to do gas for maintenance. It's got much better in the last few years. We're allowed to do more and more as we add more and more stations. So if I can work with you, or if you have an idea of where you may want to see a station, please let me know. We work with groundwater groups. I work with the National Weather Service. If we can make it work, but it has to be a partnership. We are very small. We have limited funding. If we can make something work, if somebody can help with communication costs, we may be able to add a station. Ideally, I'd like to see a station about every 25 to 30 miles. So this particular area in the Lubbock area is well situated. This was a miserably hot day when we were building this, so I took a picture of how hot it was that day. But ideally, we're still planning to fill in the Panhandle. We've also ventured east and then south, so anywhere in the western part of the state, we may be able to make it work to build a station. With the density of stations in Lubbock, we decided to create what's called a Lubbock County micronet. So Mesonet is a fancy word for a bunch of weather stations relatively close together. Micronet is an even closer network of stations. So with the TAWC, we partner with them on their land in New Deal. That's recently this summer. We also just finishing a station in South Lubbock with All Saints School. We're building a station with Lubbock Christian on the old golf course there at Lubbock Christian, and we're also building a station north of Shallow Water. So we're planning to do at least 10 to 12 for those of you in Lubbock to have what's called a dense network of stations in Lubbock County. To be the Lubbock County micronet. They'll look identical to what the other stations are. Trying to find a place that isn't being developed in South Lubbock was interesting, so we try and find an open area to do it, but as you can tell, the density in Lubbock County will be pretty significant for that region. That's all I had. If there's any specific questions on a product that you used to look at and would like to see again, I may be able to explain where you can find it or how we change that use. Yes, ma'am. Oh, in Crosby County, we have at Rawls, on the old Owens Gin property, and then we're at White River Lake with the White River Lake Municipal Water Authority. Northwest of the lake there, we have two. The station at McAdoo is actually in Dickens County, but it's pretty close to Crosby County. Yes, sir.
I know at one time that some places included PET data, and how come y'all don't have that in the ag section?
Many other groups were starting to do PET data. I tried to stay away from that. We're revisiting of how we're going to do that in the future. We're working with TAWC to do some additional ag products that they're going to release on some of their stuff. My background is weather. I've always tried to help as much as I can, but the PET equations, we never seem to use the right one, and I was always, there's different versions. The one we used to present was called the grass reference ET. That was specifically requested by the government because they were paying for it. But that grass reference equation was not representative, like a Penman-Monteith stuff, which is a lot of what the farmers wanted. So it was not. So we eventually just stopped releasing that. It was only good for the National Weather Service, not helping you. So we are revisiting of how we're going to do that in the future. But right now we don't have ET directly on the webpage. Yes. Yeah, we stopped releasing that. We're distributing that through a private company called Synoptic Data. It reached a point in the last few years when private companies were taking that, they're scraping our pages and selling it. Several were changing the data, and it got to be a legal issue. So if you need anything past that point, we distribute that to a company called Synoptic Data. If it's just a summary, there may not be a fee for that. If it's detailed data, there is a fee for some of that data. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burgett. That's a very valuable tool for all of us to use on a daily basis. Prior to our noon meal, we will have a blessing.
You're listening to live coverage of the 2023 Texas Alliance for Water Conservation Water College from the Lubbock Memorial Civic Center in Lubbock. I'm Stephen Orr. This is the Farm Station, all ag, all day. We're going to take about a 30-minute break coming up about 12:30. We'll hear from Robert Duncan, Chancellor Emeritus, Texas Tech University, and then head into our afternoon sessions with Dr. Justin Benavides from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Talking Cattle, and wrap up the afternoon with Brian Bledsoe, Chief Meteorologist and Climatologist from Colorado Springs. So that's our afternoon. Right now, we'll step away, catch you up on some ag news on the Farm Station. All ag, all day.
The Agribusiness Report.